quick quote from Chapter 5, Networking. No matter what your threat model is, this all traffic is allowed policy for both interpod and external traffic represents one giant attack vector. In other words, you should never rely on the defaults in the networking space. You should never, ever run a Kubernetes cluster without restricting network traffic in some form or shape. That's the quote. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 5, networking of this book, Hacking Kubernetes, Threat-Driven Analysis, and Defense. So one giant attack vector, that's what we're talking about. Now, the caveat is this is only by default. So a lot of people that are running Kubernetes clusters, they use a managed service, aka like a cloud provider, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure Cloud, or Google Cloud. So maybe for a lot of people who pay someone to manage their cluster, these defaults aren't as much of an issue. Of course, that's not to say that Google or Amazon or Microsoft will secure your cluster for you by default. They won't. I think like Google offers like security as like an extra feature that you pay for. Like there's secure pods or secure containers or something like that. That just takes care of a lot of stuff. So kind of like extra premium service. I'm not sure what Amazon or Microsoft do, but Kubernetes is complicated, really complicated. So a lot of developers, especially if they're not paying for someone else to manage it, they're just trying to get it to work, which is why these security issues, I think, aren't like freaking everyone out, Like if I say that I ran a Shodan search and I found, let's see, actually, because I did run a Shodan search, and I found 228,000 kubelet APIs exposed to the internet, even if you are even if you're like a hacker that, I don't know, works with networks and stuff pretty often, that's not going to mean anything to you because it's Kubernetes speak. Kubelet API, like everything about Kubernetes is specific to Kubernetes. So you could be familiar with the space of offensive security, or you could be a programmer that's familiar with programming things, but you're not necessarily going to be familiar with the architecture of Kubernetes. And that's why maybe the risk isn't so well translated. Now, speaking more about these publicly accessible kubelet APIs, I'm trying to spare the technical details, and I'm kind of fuzzy on them myself. So excuse me if I talk about things at a high level. Hopefully it's appreciated. But yeah, so there's a tool on GitHub. It's called QBolt, and it basically helps you search Shodan to find containers that you can run commands on by default. Remote code execution. Is that freaking anyone out? I mean, I think in 2018, this was a bigger issue. There's a setting in the kubelet API that I think just made it easier for this to be exploited. But it's actually by design. It's by design that the kubelet API can run commands on the containers. So it's kind of like there's a lot of things in Kubernetes like that, where yes, it poses a security risk, but it's just up to the person who's running the cluster to say, well, we'll accept this risk or not. It's always a trade-off of risk and usefulness. And again, Kubernetes is just an open source technology. It's not going to say, just philosophically, it won't say, look, you can't do this because it's a security risk. No, sometimes, sometimes people prefer things to just be open and easy. And nothing will ever be completely secure anyways. So, yeah. Back to what I was saying about this tool. It's called qbolt. So it just helps you parse requests from thousands and thousands and thousands of Kubernetes exposed APIs to run commands on them easily. That's bad. It shouldn't be this easy, right? But it is. Now, running commands on a container doesn't necessarily mean that you've hacked the whole cluster, but it's also probably not what the DevOps person or the developer who set up that container was thinking people could do. They're not just giving everybody the ability to run commands on the container on purpose, but with just a little bit of knowledge, that's what we can do. And that's where a lot of attacks start. This is pretty mind-blowing for me. I just found out about this today, and it's not actually talked about in the book, or it's talked about very briefly. This one specific vulnerability, or I should say feature, because it's not really considered a vulnerability. Yeah. So with this chapter, I was just kind of dumbfounded. There's a lot of things that are vulnerable by default in Kubernetes. The chapter talks about how traffic isn't encrypted by default. The chapter talks about how circling back. The chapter talks about an ARP spoofing attack that's pretty common because of, I guess, the way that OpenDNS is set up and some other defaults that I don't recall at the moment. But, the headline here is Kubernetes is hackable by default. That's pretty shocking to me. Now, I don't want to seem like a know-it-all because I'm not. I've never actually tested the security of a Kubernetes cluster. I'm just reading this book and taking notes, But it seems to me that the only reason that security risk isn't such a huge deal it's such a huge concern for people running Kubernetes clusters is because it's complicated, because the hacking community at large doesn't look at Kubernetes. It's kind of foreign to them. It's really esoteric, and I don't know, even just cloud offensive security itself is its own thing, and then Kubernetes is just this complicated monster within it. So, protection through complexity, I guess. That's just my opinion, my observation, I guess. But yeah, I really don't have much to say about this this chapter. There's just a lot of dangerous defaults, it seems. I look forward to later kind of exploring them myself. But at the moment, I'm just reading and kind of trusting. And what I've seen on the internet, even recently, 2021, 2022, seems to support that that the networking of a Kubernetes cluster is pretty much open by default. And if you're inside of the cluster, then yeah, forget it. If you have network access within the cluster, you can see what's going on networking wise by default, unless the cap net raw capability is taken away. So yeah, that's chapter 5. Go ahead and read the article I wrote accompanying this. It's slightly more informational than this rant of mine, And if you want to go to the source, then read this book. The first half of the book is actually available for free online, and you'll find a link in my article. So yeah, peace out, stay sharp, and keep hacking the cloud.